Hello, everyone. We can start in a few minutes. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me. Supposed to be live streamed in our Facebook page. Okay, I can see people joining na. So I think we can start. Okay, so for today, we will learn about web scraping and data wrangling in Python. So our workshop today will be taught to us by Ian Panganiban. So he's currently working at a startup called Araya Energies. So he's formerly the head of the cloud infrastructure, and now he's the chief trainer and application advisor of Araya Energies. Formerly, he also worked in various research projects in UP Diliman. So I have the opportunity to work with him on a number of those projects. And he is also a big supporter of open data, open mapping, and a very enthusiastic member of the open source community in the Philippines. And I think I will not make this long anymore. Ian, are you already good with your presentation or with
Yeah,
our workshop today? We can start. Maybe
yeah, we
you
can now
can
start.
share your screen, right? I
Yeah.
can remove my share. How can you try sharing your screen?
There's been, yeah, I'm disabled on my end.
Oh, hold on. Maybe I need to change. Stop sharing. How do I stop my sharing? Advanced sharing options, all participants. Okay, can you try again?
Okay, so I'll now start. Okay, so right. Okay, share. All right.
Can you share?
So,
Good.
I'm now sharing my screen. So yeah.
Okay,
I
I'll
agree.
stop mine. Stop share. Okay, there we go. I can see your screen. Anyone here in the chat can say if you can see the screen. I think,
Okay.
Ian,
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
working
yeah,
on a delayed. There's a
yeah,
lag
yeah.
between the live stream and us in the call.
Yeah,
So I'm just
I cannot see the my Facebook is also open on the other side, so yeah,
okay,
I
okay,
cannot
okay.
see it. So
So
yeah,
so
I guess.
guys, if you can hear us from the past, a few seconds into the past, just let us know in the comments if you can see Ian's screen already, and then we can go from there.
All right. So all right. So I guess I can already start now. Okay. So yeah, good afternoon to everyone. So if you're in Manila right now, it's quite hot. And yeah, so yeah. Thank you for having me for this afternoon session. So we're going to have a workshop regarding web scraping and data wrangling with Python. So we did a sign up or a survey of what is the level or skill level of the participants of this call. So we found that there's a number that don't have or very minimal experience or exposure to Python, or they just implemented short scripts and so on. So this workshop is not going to be a very definitive guide, but it's more of a way for us to think about the various problems in terms of web scraping and data wrangling. And of course, everything would be written in Python. So before we go into the web scraping and data wrangling components or sections of this workshop, we'll be going through some refresher regarding Python. So at least for everyone who is a beginner in programming or in um, yeah, in programming in general, we'll have some idea on how to read at least the code, and of course follow along with us today for the workshop. So right, so if you have set up the I guess we have sent the link regarding the notebooks or the materials needed for this workshop. So yeah, just look at the email. Just go back and do a copy of that materials today. So if you haven't yet opened those materials or copied it, so what you can do is double click on the link and open just what the notebook regarding Python, or the file naming 0 Python 101 dot ipynb. Then what you can do is you can click copy to drive. Okay, creating a copy. So it will do a copy of that drive. Okay, open a new tab. So I'm going to open it in my new tab here. So yeah, right. So it's now a copy of this file that is inside the Google Drive. So we can now start with this first session, or for this notebook. So we have what we call the Python refresher course, or this Python 101. So if you are already experienced regarding Python, have some maybe it's a good refresher, or more of you can go to directly to the other notebooks if you so wish. Okay. So for Python, okay, so this is the Python notebook. So if you're not familiar with Google Colab, so it's running this is our main environment wherein we're going to run our session. So this is the Python 101 notebook. So the notebook showcases the Python the power of Python as a programming language. So it can develop this notebook is an introductory session for those people who are starting with programming or in Python general. So it will not introduce very advanced concepts like OOP, clean code, or those let's say very software engineering concepts. So this is just a plain old let's just get started and so on. So for Python, so what is Python? Okay, Python was released by Guido van Rossum back in 1991. So this is also the same year or same time frame as Java or other programming languages are also springing about during those times. So Python is a high-level general-purpose programming language. So its design philosophy emphasizes on code readability with the use of significant indentation via the offside tool. So it just means here that this programming language is tailor-fitted or catered to a wide variety of applications. So from web apps, machine learning systems, games, ordinary automation scripts. So if we're going to go into the Python documentation, so if I'm going to click here, right? So this is the Python website. So if you're going to go into the python.org, so you're going to be directed to this page, and you can look at the various applications and systems that Python is being run into, right? So it is now into web development. You can build websites with it. So it's not just the WordPresses of the world. So you can build websites. You can also implement scientific and numeric computing. So for example, if you want to build your own chat GPT or large language models or machine learning, if you want to go into those fields, it's a good way to go into those fields having Python as your main programming language in mind. Then it goes into education, desktop apps, software development, and business applications. So you have an ecosystem or a rich ecosystem or environment where Python is being used. So it's not anymore just the PHPs or the Javas of the world we're in. You have a lot of those languages coming about. So going back to the notebook, okay. So again, you can use a wide variety of systems. So now I'll go into the coding part. So again, this is a refresher for this notebook, okay, for this first part of the session. So again, in Python has this what we call the print function. So I want to highlight print function here because it's commonly used in Python to check results for computation. So The good thing about Python, since it is very targeted to or catered to let's say starting or let's say people who are not into software engineering or don't have that software engineering background, um it the syntax makes it very simple. So in this case, you have this print function wherein it's mostly used to do to print, okay, to show some logs or outputs to your screen. So if you want to run this, so as you can see, we are using a Jupyter notebook. So if you click on this, right? So you're going to notice here it's allocating and connecting to the system. So what it does right now is that it's just allocating that resource or that environment. So if you're going to notice, so once you have this plots, or if you're going to notice on this RAM disk, let's say notification, you're now going to have this, the my name is going to be printed. So let's change this to Ausomemaps, let's say maps workshop. So let's have this welcome. So I just need to click this run cell here. So if you're going to notice, so it's just going to update that. Okay. So again, you can print anything here. Let's say, yeah, you can change the prompt here. You can put in your name and so on. So it has that. It has those. Next one, another functionality of Python is that since it is a computer program, right? So what does a computer program do is that it implements computation. So in Python, you implement a lot of, let's say, variables. So if you're going to go back to your, let's say, high school or even education or college days, high school, or even your current job wherein you're computing or you're adding multiple jobs or you're doing your calculations in spreadsheets and so on, you can also implement those things in Python. So it implements this, what we call the variable and data types. So what are variables? We can call, I'm going to say, as a storage for your data or the information that you're using. So variables are used to alias the information for it to be readable and accessed quickly by other parts of your system or program. So if you're going to think about it, Python is this variables that you're going to do is that it is a container or a storage of the values that you that is being stored or that you want to use as computation. Again, I'm just going to lose up. So if you're a software developer or computer scientist in the audience there, I'm losing the term. I'm using the terms or quite freely here. So just to have the people who have no or minimal background would have the some idea on what it is, right? So if you're going to look at the syntax of a variable, it's just a very simple syntax. The name of the variable and the value that you want to store. So if you're going to notice here, for a string, you need to put it into double quotation marks or single quotation marks, depending on the on the on the way you want it to be. Sometimes people implement a single quotation marks for strings and so on. And so yeah. And for, let's say, another type for the string, for another variable data type is what they call an integer. So as you can see, it is a whole number. For floats, it is a floating point, so it has a decimal. There's what we call a boolean. Basically, booleans only store true or false. Then you also have integers, sorry, lists. So basically lists, if you're coming from a programming language or other programming background, it's like your arrays in other programming languages. Or if you're coming from, if you're going to think about it, it's like a column in your spreadsheets, right? If you're thinking about it in Excel, it's like the columns in your spreadsheets or the rows in your spreadsheets. Basically, one variable can contain multiple variables here. And there's also what we call a dictionary, wherein it contains the key and value stores here. So note here that variable names cannot start with a number. So there's a restriction when creating, let's say, variables in Python. You need to start with a alphabet or even a symbol. But most of the time we're using alphabets here. So there's some exercises here. So if you're going to look at it, create a variable x and set it to the string Ausomap. So we can just do something like this again. So it will just run. So I click the run cell, it will just run. Again, we can use the print function that we've learned earlier and run it. So it now prints that x. Then create variables y and z and set them to float and integer 9 respectively. So if you're going to implement this code, again, z equals 9, then we can also print it. Print y and of course print z. So if we're going to look at it again, okay, and then create a variable 1 and set it to a string. So if we're going just to make it a proof of concept here, so one world, let's say, one string, let's say, as you can see, the console or the cell or the environment is already telling us that this is a wrong. See, it has having the error. So, but let's try it in this context, right? So if I click this, it's going to give me an error, right? So because if going to go back, variable names cannot start with a number. So let's just name it into something like that. Then we print it one string. Then we run it again just to remove that error. Okay. So yeah, basically, there's a lot of uses of variables. Again, you can implement we're just printing out stuff right now. But as they say in when you're already programming or into the software development, let's say culture or let's say job, they say the hardest part in being a programmer is naming variables because it's quite hard. I mean, if you've already exhausted a lot of names and so on, and as you can see here, we're just using simple variable names here. But once you have now a more let's say complex system or complex program, you need to implement a large or a different way of naming your variables. Okay, so moving on to the next section, as I mentioned, you have the variables and you can now implement computation. Again, as a computer program, the main job of any computer program is to compute, right? So that's why they call it compute. It's a computer program. So what you can do is that if calculations and operations in Python, you can implement various operations, right? In your, let's say, if we go back to elementary, we learned about PEMDAS, MDAS, those types of things, right? So Python also follows that same logic in running or implementing your order of operations. So again, we can implement, so using the previous variables y and z, create another variable, sum of y and z, and add variables y and z. So what we can do is, I'm just going to copy this, right? So I can copy this. Yeah, maybe we should not copy of y and z, right? So we can implement something like this. Then and print the variable sum of y and z. So using the print function again, of y and z. Okay, so we can run the cell again, so it's now correct, right? So okay, so the next one is so we have already implemented some computation regarding, and we have also shown some strings manipulation and sorry, some strings. You can also implement, we're going to go into this, what we call the list data type. So as I mentioned, if we're going to go back to the variable and data types, there's also what we call the list data type here. So the list data type allows us to store multiple storing of multiple values and multiple data types. So as you can see here, this is a list of numbers. So as you can see, 0, 2, 4, 6, 10, and 2. So as you can see, it doesn't have any restriction. Then you can also implement, this is a list of mixed data types. So you can have, as you can see, you have integers, you have floating points, you have strings, you have floating points again, and you have a Boolean. So you can have this type. So in this cell, we can also implement what we call, we can create it, list of fruits, right? Equals. Then to define a string, you need to have the two brackets. Then as you can see, you have this string, banana, saging, and apple, right? So if we're going to run this, okay, so it doesn't do anything. So you may be wondering, what if I do the same exercise, right? I do the same exercise, but I remove the quotation, right? If I run this, it will produce an error, because as you can see, if you remove the quotation here, it now triggers or considers that this is a variable. So as you can see, if you add any quotation, it treats it as a string. If you remove the quotation, it treats it as a variable. So let's just remove this line. Then we run it again. So yeah, have that. So the good thing about lists is that it provides you a way to store, again, multiple data types and multiple values into a single variable. Because just imagine if you have 1,000 values, and each of those you need to assign it to a variable, it will take you 1,000 variables. So it also tells you that you need to think of 1,000 variable names, unless they're like numeric, right? So that's the power of lists, because you just need to store it into one variable, and as a human, as a programmer, or as a person who you just need to retain or just to remember just one variable instead of the of all the variables or the values inside the variable. You just need to remember list of fruits here. So now the question is, how do you get the data from the lists here? So as you can see, we implemented the lists. Then you can implement what we call an iteration. So it's an iteration is that you're just going through the values of the inside the lists here. So if you're going to look at it, so I've set a variable here of cars, then it has Ferrari, Toyota, Mitsubishi, and Ford. Then using the print function, we can print the values inside those this value. So just so if you're going to look at it, so the syntax is very simple. Again, you implement for cars let's say cars is the name of the list that you want to iterate through and you want to print it. So using the example here, right? So list of fruits, let's try to print all of those, print the values inside this list of fruits. For fruit in list of fruits. So again, I have that syntax. So remember, you need to have the for. This is a variable. Again, there's no quotation here. This is a variable. Then you want to assign the individual values of those or the values inside the lists into a fruit to the fruit variable while it's iterating. So we can print the fruit here. So I click on this run cell here, then it now prints it here. So basically that's your iteration, right? You have this iteration and so on. And again, it's just a way for us to access the contents of the lists and so on. So basically we're just iterating through them. Then lists are very powerful data type or data structure. It provides you other operations by default. So for example, if we're going, there's a link here of commonly used list operations, but instead of clicking this link, let's just go through the ones listed here. So basically lists are operations that these are the list operations that you can do. There's the append. Append is just adding elements to the end of the list plus combining multiple lists. Insert, you want to insert an element to the specific index of the list. Remove, if you want to remove the element from the list. So you may be wondering what's an element. Okay, so for all elements or values or elements are the values inside your list. So for example, 1 is an element of list 1. 3 is an element of list 1. Tom is an element of list 2. So if we're going to want to, let's say, list 1, right? So if we're going to look at the let's say I want to add another element to list 1. So I'm just going to put list 1 dot append, let's say 100. Let's say I just want to run that. So what does it do? So then I print out list 1. So what I can do is print. So as you can see here, we have added 100 to list 1. So again, we can also implement, let's say, let's create another variable, list 3, that will add list 1 plus list 2, let's say, and I want to print list 3. So let's run it again. So as you can see here, these two lists are combined. And you'll also notice that list 1, since it was added to the list 1, or element 100 was added to list 1, it was now, and you implement a combination, combining multiple sets using the add symbol, right? And you print the list 3, it also retains that 100. So again, because you have already updated the contents of list 1. So you may be wondering, is there a subtraction in the list? So we can also always try, and it will now tell you that this is a wrong, it will provide you an error because subtraction, you're not adding, or it is not a supported operation for lists. So the only supported is the subtraction, is the addition. So because it's just combining lists. And if you want, again, if you want to remove an element from the list, so list 3 dot remove, let's say I want to remove 100, then it tells me if I need to print list 3 again, it will show me that 100 is already removed. So you can also remove that. So if append is adding an element, remove is removing an element. Okay. So for lists operations, there's quite a lot. Again, there's a link here if you want to look at the individual or the definitive lists of operations that are supported by lists. And there's the about it here. The syntax again is okay. If you're going to compare, if you're going to notice the comparison of, or the syntax for this is that you can assign a equals 1 and b equals 5. Then you can also implement a greater than or less than, greater than or equal to, are they the same, and so on. So you have all of these operations supported. And one thing that when you want to implement what we call a conditional is that it is the if else statement. So if you're going to think about it, it is like a fork, right? It is a fork in the road, right? If you want to go to let's say to your mall, you need to turn left. if you want to go to a playground, you need to turn right. So this is also similar to that, wherein you are implementing what we call control or logic controls there. So by defining what we call an if-else statement. So what we can do is that if we're going to look at this example, right? Tom like the fruit apple, right? Then it says here, create a conditional that compares this variable to a banana, then print the statement, Tom doesn't like the banana if it fails. So what you can do, if Tom like the fruit, then we can implement equal, then banana, print, let's say Tom likes the banana, else print Tom doesn't like the banana. So if we're going to run this, okay. Yeah, so we can satisfy this, but there's a faster way to implement. We just need to implement one list. So if you're going to rewrite this code, is that something like this? If Tom like the fruit, there's also what we call a not equal sign. Then we can copy this Tom doesn't like banana, then it will also be the same. So again, so you can reduce this if else into just single. So again, the power of these operators are very crucial because it also tells you the logic of your code base. Again, yeah. But this one is more what we call explainable, right? To another, if you're now having this controls or this a list or this complex if else statements, and a lot of programs actually, if coming based from my experience, a lot of programs are actually built on top of if else statements. And even if you're going into machine learning, into data science, there's a lot of if else statements here. Okay, so if you're going to look at it, we're already almost finished with this notebook. Okay, so controlling the flow and logic control. Okay, again, we can now combine the for loops and the if else statements that we have thought of early, that we have just practiced, right? So the syntax is that, again, let's say you have two variables here. Let's say the car that I like is Tesla, then cars that you have are these types. Let's say you're a car dealer, right? And I'm looking for the car brands that I like, that I want to buy. So if you're going to look at this this structure, is that for every car inside the cars that you have, you can actually check if it is something that I like. So if I'm going to do something like this, I'm just going to copy. Okay, just I highlight everything. I Control C and Control V. Then I can run this. You have the car that I like. So because you have Tesla, right? So for example, if I let's say if I change this to BMW, let's say, if I run this again, it will not do anything because it did not satisfy the condition that I am trying to portray here. Okay. So again, you can have a more complex conditional and operators here for this one, right? So you have this. Okay. So if you have any questions, just post them in the comment section in Facebook. So I'm going to answer or I'm going to go through some of those questions. If you have questions, then so we can go for it a more direct path here. So okay. So there's also what we call reading and writing files. So again, this is a very powerful tool again for Python. So just imagine if you have a CSV of, let's say, sales values, if you have a CSV of your, let's say, your products or services, you can actually play around with the data inside of it, right? So again, the syntax for, so I'm not going anymore to create a what we call, I'm not going to go through the individual parts of it because it's now going to be quite complex here. But something worth highlighting is that Python has an option to with open and file path and so on. You can have this, right? So if we're going to look at it, you just need to set the name of the file, and of course, then you can implement what we call read lines here. So maybe what we can do is that uh, let's create a new file here. Let's say file path.txt, right? So as you can see, if you're using the Jupyter Notebook, if you're following along, you can click on this on the left-hand side. There's the table of contents. Then you can browse through these files here. Then what you can do is create new file. Then you put file.txt. So what we can do, hello, my name is, so example, something like this. So I'm going to Control S to save it. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to create another cell and I'm just going to copy this, right? So if I run this, so as you can see, it just reads the contents of this one. Hello again. So I'm going to save it, Control S, then I'm going to run. As you can see, it's just reading whatever I written here. Okay. So similarly, you can also write the text file, right? So for example, I'm going to copy this, right? So I'm going to close this already, right? So I can create another cell. So for this one, paste it. Can switch the list here. So if I'm going to play around with this one, so as you can see, this is more of writing the file. So if reading is letter R, then we can also write the contents of it. So what I'm going to do is write the content of hello world or the values of these lines, hello world, to the file that we have. So if I'm going to paste it here, then if I'm going to click again the file, I double click, as you can see, it just tells me line, right? So as you can see, because it is a string, right? So let's run this again. So I'm going to double click. Now it now changes to hello world, right? So again, going back, if there is a variable, if you have string quotations here, means that if you have quotations, it means it is a string. If it doesn't have, it treats it as a variable. Okay. So again, there's also other things, functions to consolidate. So if you're going to look at this line of code here, it becomes longer and longer and longer, and it's very hard to consolidate, right? So or to build these types of function or to keep track what's happening, right? So there in Python, there's what we call functions because it allows you to group similar logic together. So if we're going to look at it, you have the check in list function wherein it provides me you don't have it will have the what we call lists to be checked and element to check. So just think of it as the car example. Then I want to check if you have the cars that I have, right? So I'm going to copy this entire code base here. So just copy the code and paste it to the cell. Then let's run this. See, you have the card that I like. So if you're going to look at it, it's also similar to what we did earlier, right? So we're just combining this logic, this function, and so on. And actually, what we also do is right? So you have this. So yeah, as a conclusion, so basically those are the things needed for now. Before we go jump into what we call the web scraping component, because these are your necessary tool sets that you need to run, that you're going to use when you're going to implement web scraping. Because web scraping, again, it will we'll go to it to the next session later, after, let's say, a short break. So we're going to have a break, maybe 5 minutes, then we jump straight to the next notebook, or the web scraping notebook. But these are the necessary tools or workflows that you need to keep in mind when you're going to implement a web scraping project, or web scraping function in this case, right? So um okay, so basically, yeah. So basically, that's the end for for this initial session for now. So we're going to go straight now to later. Maybe Cham, if you're what's the next step? But the next part would be, we're now going into the web scraping part. So we're now finished with the introduction, or just the refresher. Again, if you've already done programming before, this is quite nuance or quite simple to do.
All right. And thanks, Ian. So now we're gonna go to the next part, right? So before that, somebody in the live stream mentioned that it's a bit laggy yung live stream natin. So I would like to invite everyone just to join us on this call, and we will just continue the live stream on Facebook. But so in the comments, we will post the call link. Hold on. Okay, I can see that it's already been posted. If you guys can join us now in the call, because I think it would be also beneficial for us to be in one place. Medyo uh the web scraping part would be more technical. Okay, I'm seeing people entering the room now. I admit all. Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. Just joined us. I'll admit.
Everyone joined us.
Okay, let's just give a few minutes. If you can just mute yourselves for now so that we won't be okay. Okay.
All day. And then start here, and you come like.
Guys, can you please do us a favor and mm, mute yourselves first so we won't have any feedbacks while other people are joining the call. So do you have any questions before we move on to web scraping, or it's all very elementary for you guys? Because when we did a survey of the participants, as Ian mentioned, 1/3 of it is a beginner or never had done anything in Python before. But the half is already had some experience like doing scripting with Python. Okay.
Or if you're shy, you can just put it in the chat and you can DM the
Yes.
chat. Yeah, right. I mean, if you're shy, let's say posting it to the rest of the group, you can DM your questions. So this is also the principle moving for the next part. Maybe what I can do as well is I'm going to turn off my video and just focus on the share screen because maybe it's having that issue as well, right? So this will have more bandwidth to contend with.
All right. I think I will just continue admitting people coming from the live stream and we can proceed, Ian, if you're good.
Okay. So yeah, again, we can now proceed to the next part, which is the web scraping, which is this is the main sections that you have signed up for, not the introduction, right? So again, if you've just copied or opened the link to the materials, currently it's in read only mode. So what you need to do next is to copy to drive, right? So it will now creating a copy, okay? So you need to copy to drive. Okay, so it will create that. And what I can do is click connect just to allocate, to set up the environment that we are going to use. All right, so going back to the workshop, the workshop proper, we are now going to implement what we call web scraping. So web scraping in this notebook is the to scrape, because Python, as I mentioned in the previous section, is a powerful tool to play around data and get data from let's say a wide variety of uses. Let's say from the internet you can get data. So for today we're going to implement we're going to use a library called Beautiful Soup 4. So before going into what this library is, we're going to implement let's first try to understand what web scraping is. So due to the abundance of information being generated in the internet today, access to this information have been relatively easy. So the main problem arises on the collection and consolidation of these resources or information and using it to our own workflows, right? So web scraping is a method used by most organizations to gather data in bulk. So if you're just going to open, let's say, one website, then copy one value, if you're going to think about it, it's quite easy, right? You just need to go to the website, copy one value. But once you're going to do this every day and every single waking moment of your career, it's going to be very tiresome, right? So the beauty of web scraping is that you can automate these tasks or these processes such that you're able to do this more mechanical. You don't need to do this, you don't need to spend X amount of your time just to do that activity, can automate it. And as I mentioned, web scraping and AI. Okay, so if you're again familiar with there's chat gpt llama 2 again, Facebook released a new model called llama 2. Basically what the how those models or those machine learning models were generated is by getting data from the internet. And a lot of these resources were scraped from these websites, or let's say Facebook, or from Google, Wikipedia, and so on. They're scraping this information and putting them into a model and training those models from the data that we have gathered. So the fundamental or the first part of any web scraping is to store the data in is to get data from the internet and store it into a database or so. So again, yeah, as an example, ChatGPT was built by scraping through the entire internet. So if you're going to, let's say, ask ChatGPT, I don't know if everyone have played around with ChatGPT. If you're going to ask ChatGPT something very recent, it will say that the information that it only has is up to a certain point, because that's the only point or certain time frame where the data was scraped from the internet. Okay. So what are the prerequisites for you to get into this web scraping, let's say web scraping idea, right? Or in this workflow, right? You need to know two things. Again, previous section, we tackled about Python. Now we're going into this HTML site. So the usual web developer already knows what an HTML tag is, but for just a quick introduction about HTML, so we go into this, what we call um, this tutorial in w3schools.com. So again, so HTML is a standard markup language for web pages. So all web pages in the internet are built using HTML. So if I'm going to right click this, right, there is the inspect button here. So if you want to be inquisitive about what's happening in your browser, you can right click and click on inspect element. So, and it will pop up. If you're using Google Chrome, it will have all of these information. You can do that. Right click, it's either inspect or inspect element. So yeah, you can right click and inspect. So it will now tell you, okay, this is an HTML tag. So if you're going to look at it, this is a sample HTML page for this website, right? So if you're going to go into the website, any website, CNN, GMA, let's say other websites, or let's say even Facebook, you can right click actually then, but there's some issue with Facebook. It will tell you that you should not do right clicking of those. But again, the general idea is that all web pages belong to what we call this HTML tag, or it's composed of HTML. So if you're going to notice that since this tag is it's built on this various tags, you can get the information of these of the values between the tags here. So for example, this bracket here, let's say I want to get the value of tutorial, right? So the script or the web scraping component is automatically looking for these tags and trying to parse the data from it. So again, so if you're going to go into this HTML tags and so on, you can play around with, you can look what the contents of the data. So again, the primary tool that we're going to be using is what we call the Beautiful Soup 4. So if you're going to search through Google about Beautiful Soup, and it will tell you, okay, this is Beautiful Soup. So again, Beautiful Soup is a Python library designated for quick turnaround projects like screen scraping. So it handles those things. So there's a lot of documentation regarding download and so on, how to set up, and there's a lot of documentation here. But we were not going to go into those individual. And again, the assignment after you finish this workshop is for you guys to and girls to go into to practice and to look at the API of the Beautiful Soup. So because this is not going again to be a definitive guide, because there's a lot of functions, there's a lot of APIs that needs to be handled using Beautiful Soup 4. What I'm going to present is only the workflow, the generalized workflow, wherein you can just pattern your exercises or pattern your scripts for that. So, okay. Parse through HTML, as I mentioned, and retrieve the value or data that we want. There's also scraping tools and libraries supported by Python, like Scrapy, if you're into that. It's a robot framework, like so on. But we're not going to go into that. We're just going to focus on the Beautiful Soup 4 API, or the functions of Beautiful Soup 4. So for any web scraping project, here is the anatomy of it. So basically, it only has what we call the 3 functions here. There's what we call the store, but it is optional. You don't need to have this this function here. But the anatomy of this web scraping is that you have a retriever, you have a parser or extractor, and you have a transformer. So a retriever is responsible to fetch information from a website. So retrievers are not responsible for extracting or parsing information. So what do I mean by a retriever? Basically, a retriever function is basically building the contents of this website. So for example, it is responsible for going into this link, opening the link, copying the data from that link, and so on. Up to that level only. It will not go into the individual values of that link or that content of that page and trying to parse it. Because what we're going to give it, we're going to pass the information that you have gotten from the retriever and pass it to the parser or extractor. So parsers are responsible to go through the information fetched by the retriever. Logic controls, like if statements, let's say I want to extract all the tables. So if tag is equal to table, then I want to get those information, right? So you have that idea. Or if I want to get all the images from that website, I can also do that. Then once the information or value is extracted, it will be then passed to the transformer, which changes the form or structures, because when you retrieved or when you got the values now, maybe you want to add some computation for it. For example, let's say I want to transform or to implement some, let's say, currency exchange rate, right? Because that value, you want to transform it into, let's say, US dollars because it's in peso, or in US dollars, you want to convert it into peso, given the current exchange rate that you have. So the transformer is responsible to change the form or structure of that value. So then, of course, there's what we call the storer function, wherein it will store it into a CSV, text file, database, let's say JSON files, and so on. So you have but in terms of, so you have these functions or the anatomy of those of this web scraping, and you have this 4 functions or this 4 body parts of a web scraping. So we will, so for this tutorial, we will be scraping the following links. So if we're going to open this link, okay. So this is a Wikipedia, right? So it tells you the economy of the Philippines, right? So if you're going to notice, there is a table here. We can just go through this page first, okay, before we go into the individual elements. So as you can see, there's a block of text here. There is an image here, and it tells you other information, right? There's also tables, right? Maybe you want to extract all of these tables, right? You want to extract. There's also other parts of it. As you can see, there are also other images, as you can see here. There's also sections. There's also another table here. If you're going to look at it, right? There's also another table, and so on. So as you can see, the hard part in all of these is that, okay, if it's just a single value, you can copy, right? Copy paste it, right? Some people would just, okay, highlight everything. But just imagine what if you're going to implement it for all countries, right? So it's going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be time consuming for that. So we can try to inspect this table, right? So for this exercise, we were going to extract this table here. So if we're going to right click here, again, we can look at inspect or inspect element. I can do right click and click on inspect. So going back, inspect. So as you can see here, right? So it is built inside a table here. There's a table class. So knowing HTML, so the tags, we want to access all of these values. We want to get all of these values, and of course the regions and so on, right? So if we're going to inspect it, there's the Metro Manila. I want to get the value of Metro Manila here. I want to get the value of 32.33, for example, and so on and so forth, right? So this is the job of our, or the task at hand or the objective for this notebook. Okay, so this page we will be extracting the regional accounts table. So this is the regional accounts table. Okay, so as you can see, there's the regional accounts, and we want to get this table. So the usual step is that you want to retrieve or use functions because it doesn't belong to the standard library that we have, or it's not built in Python. We're going to use the beautiful soup library and of course the requests. So we can just click this here. Okay, again, it's now stored. Okay, it's now checked. So again, what is the anatomy of the any web scraping project? You need to have a retriever, right? So the retriever, basically to implement the retriever step, we will be using the request library. So basically, this is the main library to get the data or to go into this link, right? So we're just going to paste the link here, as you can see. So okay, maybe what we can do next is that we can try to print what is in the print, right? Print the URL. What is the result of this request? If I'm going to click that. So as you can see, there's that. Then if I'm going to type text here, right? So basically it now retrieves to me the entire page here. As you can see here, there is a lot of pages here and so on. As you can see, there's a lot of page. As you can see, if you want to go to the individual to other countries, there's also the link here. So you can build that. So as you can see here, there's a lot. So this is the entire content of that. So again, the retriever function, it only retrieves the content. It doesn't do any transformation. It doesn't parse it. It doesn't transform it or anyway. It just retrieves the content from this link. Okay, so let's just remove this just to make it cleaner. Okay. Okay, now we move on to the parser. So again, the parser, this is the main logic or the main brains behind any web scraping anatomy or project. We need to have this, what we call the parser. So if you have this, so we're just going to run this cell here. So again, what you can always do is print the result of this one. Again. So as you can see, it's just similar to what we retrieved from before, right? It doesn't change anything from what we have. But the beauty of this now is that since it's now running in this beautiful soup, it's now part of this what we call the beautiful soup function, is that it allows us to implement certain type of functionality on our code base or into the, it adds additional level of functions here. So as you can see here, there is retrieve all the tables inside the web page. So we're going to use the previous source and we're going to retrieve all the we're going to find all the tables and have this class wiki table, right? So if we're going to print all tables here again, I'm going to print. It's always good to print out stuff here just to see what is happening. So as you can see, so let's see. Can copy. Okay, let's see. Oops. So if we're going to go on top, as you can see, this is a list. All tables are all the tables that we have extracted are already stored in a list. So again, going back to the list data type can contain multiple values, right? So now we have all the tables inside from the page that we have scraped. So again, let's just remove this, okay? Just to make it cleaner. Now, let's try to inspect this regional table, right? So if we're going to look at it, regional table belongs to this all tables in the first, this key, right? So we can now have this regional table, right? You may be wondering, how did I know that regional table is is index at 0, it's at 1, right? Because we have, how many tables do we have actually here? Is that we have this first table, and we have another table. So in Python or in lists, it starts with it's zero indexing. So it starts with 0. So this is table 0. And this is what we call table 1. This is table 1. So going back, that's why I named this as 1. Right. So this is the regional table. Okay. So going back, so let's now the code becomes more complex here. Okay. So just follow along. Okay. So what now will happen is that we want to extract the top headers, right? So the headers, what do I mean is that the headers are this row on top, right? Again, the code here is not meant to be very how we say it's I'm not aiming for clean code. I'm aiming for verbosity in this case. So for example, let's retrieve all the headers, right? I want to retrieve this. So we know that a table is made up of rows and columns. So for every, if we're going to look at this HTML page, right? So for every row is captured inside a TR. So this is the entire row. So for HTML to build a row of a table, or it is composed of a TR tag. And inside the TR tag, you have what we call the TD, which is the cell itself, and you have the H. You have the cell here, TD. Okay. So what I'm going to do is retrieve all the rows, right? I want to retrieve all the rows inside this. Then from all of those rows, I want to identify the H or the TH, because if we're going to look at this, this tag here, it's also a TH, right? So I want to retrieve those TH. Okay. So I want to get this letter P1000, page P1000s, or this GRDP, gross regional domestic product. Okay. So now we're implementing some logic control. So going back to the, if I cannot find any TH, right? So because it can be that this row only it doesn't have any TH, right? So you may be wondering, okay, there is no TH. What will just happen is just I'm going to skip through the code. So, but if I find those code bases, right? If I'm able to find the TH part, then what I'll do is store those attribute headers. So as you can see here, I also have the if count because I just want to get the first row, this one, right? If you're going to notice, you don't need this one if you're going to look at the code base, right? You just want to have the first row, which is count 0. Again, 0 indexing. You always count at 0, 1, 2, 3, up to so on. And it's always 0 base indexing. Okay. Now we have this, what we call the attribute headers, right? So the attribute headers. So I'm going to put those lists or those headers into a list, right? Into a list that is named or has a variable name attribute headers. Okay. So running this code will now yield this list wherein I now have the top row. Okay. So you may be wondering, okay, what is he trying to accomplish? So what I am trying to accomplish is that put this row or put this column into the GRDP. So what I'll be doing for us to have an easier time later is that I want to know, or I want to tag these values here into GRDP. So for me to do that, I first need to have the rows or headers on top. Okay. Okay, you have this. Now, we want now to implement what we call to extract the column values. Okay, going to what we know earlier about tables, right? It's made up of rows and columns. So next step that we want to achieve is that we want to get the individual rows here, right? Individual rows, and get the value of 6,309,200. Sorry, 6,309,290,637. So I want to get all of these values here. So for me to do that, again, what I want to do is that I want to get the headers again, th, because why am I trying to get the headers here? So because what I want to know now is that I want to identify that this value is in Metro Manila and this value also belongs in GRDP for me to have a good mapping of this value is in Metro Manila and GRDP. So this is what I'm trying to do here. So as you can see, again, the code is not the main focal point here. I want you to focus on how the logic is being built, how we are trying to define the workflow. Okay, so now we have identified, okay, these are the various columns of the we have identified these are the columns for this, right? So what's the next step here is that for every column, I want to retrieve this value only. I don't care about the percentage here. I want to remove this percentage. I just want to focus on the 6 billion, this 442,000 and so on. Because again, problem here is that you have percentages and sometimes you don't want to deal. I don't want to deal with percentages. Again, it's your call if you want to use the percentages or so on. But what I just want to achieve here is that I don't want to use any percentages. So again, what I'm going to implement is that you have that. Now you have the city from the previous implementation of the headers, right? This is the Metro Manila and so on. So what I'm trying to build is a key value store of all the values that is stored in Metro Manila. For better explanation, we can just print the data. We can just, sorry. We can print it. So if I'm going to run this, right? So as you can see here, Metro Manila is the key, right? So this is a dictionary, right? This is a going back dictionary is composed of a key and a set of value. So Metro Manila is the key and it stores into a list the individual values that we have here. So as you can see here, I am removing the comma because everything once you put into a website, everything is converted into a string. So for us to make use of this data later, we want to convert everything into a float or into an integer if everything is a whole number. As you can see here, everything is a whole number. So actually what you can do is just implement an integer here. There's also integer and there's also float. So this one, it just forces the value that we have into a float. So again, I've just implemented this to make it more easier to read, right? So Metro Manila has these types of values here. So Calabarzon, Northern Mindanao, and so on, Bangsamoro, and so on. Now, this is basically the parser. So what we already did here is that we parse the information and store it into a database. Into a list. Now, again, if we're going to think back or go back to the anatomy of a web scraping exercise or pipeline, is that we have what we call the transformer here, right? The transformer is we will implement some post-processing and transform and combine extracted header values and the attributes. So what I want to do next is that this Metro Manila here, right? For this Metro Manila, for this value of 6 billion, I want to tag it now to the, I want to tag it now to the header information here. So you can try to do that again. CSV data. So let's just print this, okay? So what it does. So what happened now is that what I did is just to put these values. So for example, this Eastern Visayas, I want to put it back to the list. So I want to make it easier for me to see, right? It now belongs to the list. So basically that's the basic transformation, right? So I just want to transform this dictionary here, this key value, right? This key value into this list. Because what we're going to implement next is to store the data into a CSV format. So if I'm going to click this save, then going back to our exercise earlier, there is data, right? If I'm going to click on economics CSV, it already generates this. So this is already the CSV value that we have created or that we have parsed or scraped from Wikipedia. So basically, that's the basic workflow of a web scraping. The next part is basically we want to transform or visualize these types of data into a graph or into a what we call various charts and graphs and so on. So if we're going to again, web scraping is only a part of the workflow. Again, the end all be all is not actually the web scraping. Web scraping is just a tool for us to get data. So if let's say if government data is publishing, let's say if you're into this government, their government is publishing data from let's say for sales records or for if you're into fisheries or you want to identify consumer price index and so on, those types of things, because government is publishing those information quite regularly, you may want to create already a script that will get those information and put it into a database, and you can build some analytics out of it. So basically that's the web scraping section. Again, this is I did not focus so much in the workflow into the individual APIs or individual what does find all do and so on, because the code or how do you implement this or the individual API calls of, let's say, of beautiful soup can be actually, you need to learn through it, and you need to have this multiple experience, what we call, you need to be, how you should say, you need to have this experience to have more practice. You need to practice a lot, and you need to scrape a lot of data just to be more proficient, because an afternoon of workshop here that we did is not going to be enough. Even if I spend you guys around 24 hours just laying out, okay, let's do this. The only way that you can learn and of course be proficient about how to do this is to scrape, to constantly scrape. And if you're going to look at this, right, there's also other economies in for this one. So for example, let's try to look another let's say I want to get the data of Malaysia, right? So as you can see here, there's also data here about GDP. As you can see, it's not similar to what scraping that we did earlier, right? It has a different form or structure. So something to note regarding web scraping is that it is structure dependent. So what does structure dependence mean is that you need to look at the structure. If the one structure or the website changes, let's say it added another row or it added another column, the structure changed and it will break the script. So that's why when you're going to implement scraping, a lot of times it's a trial and error scenario or workflow. And that workflow is sometimes it's very time consuming. So what usually happens is that you need to have this intuition of and defining the structure and workflow quite fast and trying to um, revise the script that you have created and build a new revision of it, right? So yeah. So okay, are there any questions for this one? So again, for the web scraping, again, there's a lot again for this one. Again, the workflow is is pretty much straightforward. It is not you just need to get data from, let's say, the internet, right? I want to parse it, I want to transform it, and I want to store it into a CSV. That is the web scraping workflow. It doesn't have any more it is not as complex as some other systems or scripts out there. The question would come from is, okay, what will be the complexity is coming, what will be the hard part, which one of this will be the hard part, next hard part, right? So the transformer, sorry, if we're going to go back to this anatomy of web scraping, the parser, this is your main logic. As long as the structure or form of the website can be retrieved or can be understood, you can actually build the parser and extractor quite efficiently. The next part will be the retriever. Retrievers are quite hard to, how do you say, measure, because every website changes. Every website may have a pattern in the URLs. So as you can see, if we're going to look at the retriever function, this is a very simple. It's like this, right? This is the economy of the Philippines. So what if I change this to, let's say, Malaysia, right? Just going to run this. So for Malaysia, right? So as you can see, I can retrieve. So if we're going to think about it, maybe what I can do next is that I can create a list of all the countries in the world, right? Then I can just for loop this, right? I can just loop through all of the countries and just replacing this final value here, right? You can implement it something like that as well. You can have more logic to your retriever as it's currently stands. So what do I mean here is that, let's say you have, let's say, countries, right? Let's say you have a countries list, let's say Philippines, right? Let's say Thailand, let's say Malaysia, right? So we have this. Let's assume then you can implement for country in countries, right? Then you can implement URL equals request.get. Again, you can have this, right? So if then for any string operation, then we can have it like this, right? So print URL.text. Let's say URL.text. So as you can see, let's just URL.text. Just want to test, right? So now it tells me now the various countries that are stored, right? From Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and so on. You can implement as complex as a retriever or something like this. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the initial state of this. Okay, yeah. You have questions? I guess one of the exercises that you can do after this workshop is that instead of retrieving these regional tables, right? These regional tables here. Instead of retrieving this, why not retrieve this one, this international comparisons table, right? Okay. Okay, I think there are no questions.
Hello.
Yeah,
Hi
go ahead.
guys. If you have any questions, I would like to encourage you to ask them. If there's any part of the web scraping notebook that Ian just discussed, let us know, and we would be more than happy to answer those questions.
Okay. If okay, so let's
Can we discuss
okay.
the audience? Guys, okay, so I'm
Uh,
getting, somebody said that they're getting an error in my
so,
collab on the URL part now. Is it the initial one? Nate, I think you can unmute and we can,
it's hard to do a screenshot, right? So this one.
is it there? Hello, Nate?
You have a screenshot? Yeah, yeah.
It's there now.
Okay. So you just need to run this. Did you create a what we call, because it's a read-only notebook, right? So you need to copy it to your drive and open it. Um web scraping. So I have this Automate the Boring Stuff, right? There is a very good book here about practical programming. This is a good general um stuff here. So search and download web online content. So this is a free book actually. So if I'm going to click this web scraping, it tells you a lot about web scraping, figure out URL. So what I'll do is post this one into the chat here. So because it also tells you other Python stuff. It's not just about web scraping and also spreadsheets, JSON files. Yeah. So this is for this one, there's what we call the web scraping. This is chapter 12 and so on. So it tells you the other statuses and so on. Yeah, HTML, quick refresher. Yeah. This is actually this Automate the Boring Stuff is a very good book, especially when you're just starting Python and you want to implement something that's useful in your life. This it's not very complex. For example, work with PDFs, spreadsheets, right? This is the common tasks that we currently do as professionals or as just common person, right? I mean, that's usually.
Another question, Ian, from Katrina.
Can we use for all websites? Okay, so okay, can we use beautiful? Okay, I'm not going to say all websites because not all websites are built for like HTML tags. Because there are websites. So for example, let's say the Flash one, the Flash, there's the, let's say, video websites, right? There, wherein there's a lot of what we call video content or media content. Let's maybe we can look for an example. This is GeoPortal. I think that's one. GeoPortal. Let's see. Philippines. So for example, this one. Uh, for example, this types of websites wherein you have this types of interactivity on the map wherein it's not based on, let's say, it's still based on HTML, but it's quite hard to parse. So I don't recommend as you can see here, it becomes unresponsive because there's a lot of heavy content that's happening behind the scenes. So heavy media heavy content is quite hard to parse through because it's just heavy. So the main this is not only for the library, but it's common to all web scraping libraries, is that the limitation is still based on structure. So if there is a change in the structure of the code base or in the HTML or the website, it can still break. And again, can we still scrape for websites that require login? Yes. So how do you change that, right? You need to adapt or change this retriever, right? So the usual website. So for example, if there is a login, right? Usually it has this or something author here, that then you add your username and password, something like this. you have this. This is just an example. And sometimes there's also an API token. There's a token variable. As long as you can supply these things, you can actually break the login. But there are some logins that are very restrictive. So again, looking at the website, right, you can change or you can actually update this one. If you can bypass it, then you can retrieve it. But the logic for example, for getting data from one website is actually the retriever function, this one. It will happen in this part. Not so much on the parser. It's going to be in this retriever. You need to make your retriever more smart because some websites, so I'll give an example. Some websites add CAPTCHA. So they have CAPTCHA, right? Wherein you need to click which one are fire traffic lights, which ones are buses, which ones are cars, and so on. So those types of website, they are added to have those web scraping. So you don't it's hard to web scrape those. You can still do them, but you need to use other tools. So maybe the other tools, this is already outside of this workshop, but these are the other tools that you can think of that you can look at, is what we call Selenium. So Selenium is that what usually does is that it automates the clicks. So for example, there's a website, right? And you need to click a number of buttons first before you can download the data, so for example. And Beautiful Soup cannot do that because it doesn't mimic the clicks. If you want to mimic the clicks, you can use Selenium here. So this one. For example, in Selenium, I want to click this and so on. So there's also Selenium tutorial, right? So Selenium tutorial. So there's also a good tutorial for Selenium. Let's look for a good example for that. Yeah, there's a lot actually. There's a lot of tutorials here, but I usually recommend that if you cannot implement it using Beautiful Soup, you may want to try out Selenium because it automates browser. So automates browser clicks. So for example, let's say it will render in Chrome, it will render in Firefox, it will render in Microsoft Edge. It will use those browsers to click and get data. And they're going to be quite more complex. How should I say more complex? Because sometimes if the website is very slow, right? So for example, if I click this, let's say if I go to Best Tools, right? It doesn't render immediately. So it's still loading, right? It will still load and so on. So you'll need to learn more about Selenium in this case. So that's my go-to options. If let's say if I can download or scrape the website using Beautiful Soup, I use that because it's the least resistance. If it becomes more complex, it becomes more, how you should say, heavy to download, or it has a lot of interactions that is happening, go for Selenium. Okay, any more questions?
Yeah, I would also like to add that some websites, they employ a service that protects their websites from being scraped.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, the
We
captchas and so on.
encountered
Those are,
some of those before. And
yeah.
another thing to consider is that some websites are built on the fly. And you need to introduce some delays, right? Before you run this parser.
Yeah. And that's why when you're already into those levels, you may want to use Selenium for that, because you can introduce delays. So for example, when you click on a button, for example, when you click on, let's say, one button, you can delay for, let's say, 2 seconds, right? Before you click the next part. So that's one thing that you can get around those. Because for Beautiful Soup, for this types of web scraping library, it only has this limitation of, okay, it should have the content already available. And it's not, as Cham mentioned about websites being rendered immediately. Not rendered on the fly, as I should say, rendered on the fly, then you need to use Selenium or are more complex. So there's also Scrapey. As I mentioned, there's also Scrapey. This is already a crawling web framework for this, right? To create spiders and so on. It's yeah, there's a lot. Actually, it can be a separate workshop. Web scraping for Selenium only. Then we can have a maybe a 2-hour workshop regarding web scraping in Selenium. All right. So yeah, can have that. So if you want to have that workshop, give we can have those as well in the future. All right.
Somebody already says yes, please.
Okay.
So
So
let's take a couple of minutes and share why are we needing this kinds of technology for Ausomemaps. So you guys are joining the Ausomemaps workshop. So Ausomemaps is a project funded by the Open Mapping Hub Asia Pacific through the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. And our aim is to map the therapy centers in the Philippines. So that includes speech, occupational, and physical therapy centers in the Philippines. And another aim for this project is to update the tags of those schools that are already existing on the map to include if they have special education classes. So in our quest for this initiative, we deal with data a lot. And some of the data are available on the websites of different agencies. For example, the National Council on Disability Affairs actually has a list of SPED centers that we needed to map. So for us to get those data sets, we can either scrape, we can either create a script, just as the one that Ian showed using Beautiful Soup, and get all of those information from the website directly. Of course, we need to consider also the permissions that we have to use the data sets. So before we did employ some scraping for the data sets that we needed for this project, we asked permission first. Because if you're gonna read some of the like terms and conditions for every website that you would be scraping, maybe some terms there includes not allowing to do such things. So we need to be aware of those kinds of limitations as well. All right.
and something worth highlighting, going to that permissions and legal stuff, right? Um, you have to be wary about, again, the data, and as well as the way that you are trying to scrape, because there are some tools out there that actually not only delays the website, right, the render on the fly and so on, but it also have this blacklisting, wherein if they notice your IP address is being what we call constantly getting data or
Suspicious.
scraping, you'll be banned. So for example, like that. But again, if you're going to use this for moderate and personal use only, and you're not going to be exploitative about certain parts of the information or scraping and so on, then you'll be fine. How I always say that this is only a tool, right? It's still up to you guys on how you're going to use the tool and so on. Okay, so next, I guess we can now proceed to the next session. Okay, so we are going to the again, if let's go back to sorry, just so I'm just going to close up stuff here. Okay, so we're now going to go into the what we call data wrangling. So again, what we want to do is copy to drive here. Okay, click creating copy to drive. Okay, copy to drive. So again, because since I cannot, this is a read-only notebook, so I'll do a copy to drive first. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so again, so data wrangling. So maybe some of you have heard have just heard this or this term, right? I mean, data wrangling. I think there's a question in the survey. What is data wrangling? It's now we're into this data science, machine learning society already. We're already in that age. We're in data is becoming more useful, and we're now going into this what we call um sorry, this is wrong. So what I'll do is it's not scrape power to process data. So it's not scrape. Okay, process data. Sorry, there's a typo. Okay, so okay, okay. So yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, data wrangling is basically a process of cleaning, organizing, structuring, and enriching raw data to make more accessible and useful for analysis. So essentially, this is the data science workflow. If you've heard about it and so on, again, I'm not going to go into what is data science, but the general idea is that you have data and you want to make sense. You want to analyze your data. So basically, that's that entire process of getting data, processing data, visualizing data, interpreting and understanding, analyzing your data is what they call data wrangling. So it involves converting and plotting data from raw. So what we have retrieved from web scraping, right? So if we're going to think about those, we're going to have those available, right? We scrape the data and we want to analyze it. And it's mostly used for analytics. So it makes it easier for us to analyze and interpret because not everyone knows how to. Number one, if we're going to read the notebook, right? So if we're going to analyze this, this CSV here, right? So if we're just going to go back to the previous notebook, this is the web scrape that we did. So what does it tell us, right? It doesn't tell us anything more. It just tells us that Metro Manila has this value of for this GRDP, right? It doesn't tell us it's you need to analyze this further for you to make sense out of it. But as it stands right now, Metro Manila has this value. For agriculture, for Metro Manila, it has this value, and so on and so forth. So data wrangling transforms the data that we have gotten and creates some visualizations out of those. So I want to highlight this what we call the domain-driven data wrangling. Okay. Data wrangling, as I mentioned, is just one of the tools work with data, but it should not contradict. Sorry. It's just a tool, right? So also equally important is to have your expertise driving your data wrangling and analysis because there's a lot of let's say the COVID response period, right? Because there's an abundance of dashboards in social media. I think in 2020, right? We're in okay, there is an analysis wherein COVID is now having it only affects cold countries and so on and so forth. There's a dashboard that there's a lot of cases in certain areas of the world and so on and so forth. But the problem, you have to be wary of those information because sometimes as outsiders, we tend to see patterns that should not be there in the first place because it's contradicting certain domains, right? Or certain sciences. So for example, um if it mentions that it has this value and it contradicts the common knowledge and common understanding, then it becomes misinformation and so on, right? So and be very careful about the data wrangling on how you use it to drive decisions because it tends to, if you're not into that domain, you may introduce some biases, you might introduce some misinformation and so on. So you have to be very wary of those. So for prerequisites, again, before we start, you still need you will need to have the basic knowledge for the following technologies. Again, we're just going to use Python. Okay. So okay. Yeah, you need to use Python for those. Okay. Okay, so before we go into this one, right? So what needs to happen is that um, what we can do, I want you, if you have followed the previous workshop, I want you to download the file. Okay, you can download it, right? So let's say wiki economics, it will just save that in, right? So I want you to download the data. Next is that we're going to what we call we're going to go into hands-on already. So what you need to do is upload to session storage, and I want you to upload the okay, so I want you to upload the data here, right? So there's the, if you click here the files and click upload, then upload the CSV that you have downloaded from the previous notebook section, because we're going to use that data, as you can see here. So again, we import the libraries, okay? So we're going to use pandas, matplotlib, and numpy. So again, these are the common libraries that are being used to do this data wrangling. So maybe I'll just give a brief introduction about these libraries, okay? Pandas, pandas is not the panda as the animal, but the pandas is basically a powerful, flexible, open source data analysis and manipulation tool. So think of it as your spreadsheets, right? If you're going to think about it, you have Excel, right? You can drag and drop or copy, cut, paste the cells of spreadsheets, columns, rows, columns, and paste it to another column and so on. You can automate those things actually. Some of you may have worked with macros. It's basically doing that, but it's not limited in a spreadsheet. You can also do that in CSVs. You can also do that without the need of a spreadsheet, actually. So that's pandas. Next one is what we call the matplotlib. So again, matplotlib. So matplotlib, so essentially it's basically a charting graphing library in Python. So we can build various graphs here. As you can see, there's a lot of graphs. We're going to implement some graphs given the data that we have downloaded or that we have generated from the web scraping exercise. So again, so as you can see here, this code will fail. If you're going to look at it, this will fail because it is not found. So what needs to happen next is that just remove the data here. Just remove the data just to load it because it's looking at the first level, right? So what we can do, so this is pandas, right? It basically reads the CSV. So it does the read CSV format. So instead of the previous syntax, right? The with, open, something like this, right? Wiki, some economics. Instead of using this syntax, we just need to do it like this because it all. The good thing about pandas is that it abstracts this verbose way of writing wiki file. So for example, it does everything already behind the scenes. So you don't need to write the with already. Okay. So economics data, again, we want to store it. Then once you store it, once pandas reads it, it transforms it into a data frame. So as I mentioned, pandas act as like your spreadsheets, right? So spreadsheets, you have rows and columns. So for pandas, it transforms it into a data frame. So this is a data frame, as you can see here. So the CSV that we did is already converted into this data frame. So as you can see here. So something worth noting is that there's another column here on the left-hand side. This is an added column by the data frame. It is not actually inside the CSV. So let's try to inspect this one. So as you can see here, this is identical, but you don't there, but in a data frame, there's an added index column. for that data frame. So that's the main difference between the CSV, between doing this pandas read CSV and the usual format that we're doing the with open that syntax. And this one is that for data frames, it is for pandas and data frames, there is another column, which is the index column here. Okay. So essentially, it now loads everything into this data frame. So then there's also a way to access this data frame. So again, to access a data frame, this is there are three types of retrieving information, right? So there is the iloc, loc, and df. Okay, so what are the difference between? So let's look at this example here. So before we go into this actual example into our data, let's just have a toy example here. Wherein you have this data frame wherein it is a CSV or a data value of these types of data. So for loc is that you are retrieving the, sorry, we have to run that. I have to run this. Okay. So if you're going to notice, right, loc is the you're retrieving it on this row here, right? So loc think is the row label location. So the row label is this Jane here. It's Jane, Nick, Aaron, Penelope. So if we're going to implement Aaron, so we can also implement Aaron here. So okay. Okay, you can retrieve Aaron with 12 red, mango, 120, 9.0, and Florida State. Sorry. So yeah, that's for loc or row label location. Basically, all for every row there is a label, so you can retrieve it using Jane. Then you have what we call the iloc, so index. So if we're going to retrieve think back of the indexing, it's a zero-based indexing again. So we have this one, okay, iloc. So if we're going to retrieve iloc, so this is Jane, right? So df.iloc. So if we're going to count, right? So Aaron is 0, 1, 2. So Aaron is number 2. Index 2. Okay. So as you can see here, Aaron. Okay. Okay. So for CSVs, it also does that. So, but instead of having Aaron and Jane for the location, it's now doing the zero-based indexing here. And if you want to retrieve a certain column only, let's say you just want to retrieve the age column here, as you can see, you can retrieve the age. We can also try to retrieve another column, which is what we call the state. We will only retrieve the state, which is this one. So it's good. We can just retrieve the specific columns that you wish to retrieve. And again, the main difference, okay, the main difference between loc and iloc is that location can be a string, as you can see, can be a string. Iloc is always an integer, okay? Location can be a string or an integer, but for iloc, it is always an integer, just to have that distinction properly separated, okay? So yeah. If you want to retrieve again columns, you just need to define the name of the column and it will all of the rows will be retrieved. So something to note as well is that when you're going to print this data, as you can see, since the data is only small, it will if your data is, I think, about more than 10 or more than 50, if your data is around 50, pandas will only render the first 50 rows because it may have an issue. Because rendering, let's say 1 million rows, right? Your browser will not be able to handle it. So for this types of exercises, it only renders the first 50. So you may need to check if the transformation that you did is also applied to other parts of the section or the data. Just something to So again, back to our main example, economics data, we'll have the same iLoc and loc uses. Because if we're going to go back to this example, as you can see, this is your row index, right? This is also your label index. Your iLoc and loc will be the same because it automatically, for CSVs, it automatically assigns the location, the label location into to the 0, right? Okay, so again, and for data frames, again, the good thing about data frames, it applies this various statistics here, right? So if we're going to run this, you can just type describe and it already counts those it implements a count, for example, 1.7. So this is just 17. So it changes the formatting, right? It also tells you the mean of the data, standard deviation, mean, and the max. This is very useful actually for if you want to do this quick statistics of the data. There's also, if you want to implement specific statistics for the column, then you can also implement that. So the 25% percentile and so on. Then, as you can see here, we can implement agriculture. Again, how do we define the agriculture data, right? Economics data. So if we're going to look back to our agriculture data, so we just need to copy this, right? So if we're going to think about it, we just need to copy here, okay? Paste, then we type describe. So can implement the describe function, right? So describe is very useful if you want to implement those types of things. Okay. So as you can see here, basically data wrangling, you're implementing these steps of reading the data, processing the data, and visualizing the data. So this is another step of implementing visualizations here. So the visualization, we're going to use the matplotlib. So again, if you click on this link, it will show you example code base, example graphs that you can build using matplotlib. So as an initial graph, we're just going to create this is a toy example, just a sample code wherein we can implement various graphs. So for example, apple, blueberry, and cherry, and orange, you can implement it. So what it does is that you need to define the labels or the x-axis. So again, okay, so maybe we can do this line per line or code for better understanding. So what we do here, the first is that we're trying to create the container first. We're going to build the container, which is this canvas here. So that's why we need to initialize the subplots or this matplotlib library or this function. Then from here, we're going to define the data. So these are the various data sets that we want to use to render it. Then we're now going to create the bar graphs, right? The various bars. So what will happen is that we define the x-axis, which is this one. Then we define the y-axis, which is the count, which is this one. Then we define the labels. So the bar labels are the usual x-axis. Labels, again, bar labels for this red, blue, orange, so this one. Then we define the colors for it. So as you can see here, this is just a sample syntax of the code. Right? So blue, red. So you may be wondering why is it red underscore red here? Because what we're trying to say here is that, okay, this label in cherry is also a red, should be colored red as well for this one. Sorry, it will have a same label for the red. As you can see, if we have, let's try to remove the underscores. Let's see if it will also have change bar labels. As you can see, there's going to be multiple reds here. So to eliminate that, we just want to, because there's no point having multiple reds here, right? So what it does is that you're assigning it but not going to use it, and so on. So this is a magic function or magic syntax in Python. Again, there are magic syntaxes in Python that you may want to look at. So this is what they call the dunder step. So dunder syntax. So what it usually does in programming is that I want to apply this function, but I don't want the output, because as you can see here, we have 4 elements here, 4 elements and 4 elements, and you have 4 elements across the x-axis. Something to note regarding matplotlib is that you need to have that consistency of labels, consistency in terms of data and labels. If you don't have that consistency, the code will, matplotlib will have an error. So in this case, you need to have this, what we call the code consistency or label consistency in this case. Then we're now going to plot the labels, right? The graph. So once we are able to plot it, we can set the fruit supply. We can, let's name it capital F. Then we can create that. So as you can see, you have that. Then at the end, you're going to implement the show. And there's a lot of what we call functions and properties of matplotlib to modify the look and feel of the graph. So if you're going to go into these types of examples, so if I'm going to look at the examples for this, right? So as you can see, there's bar lines, line graphs, you can have scatter plots, you can have stack plots, you can have the a lot of various charting. So you can have even customized, you can have combination plots, combo plots, and so on. Basically, it's you can even build a dashboard out of this, right? So wherein you can have surfaces, you can have 2D plots, and so on. So there's quite a lot. We're not going to go through all of this because it's quite how should you say, very expensive to go through. You just need to have this creation component. Now we're finished with the toy example, right? The next one is what we want to do is that given the data that we have scraped and transformed or analyzed, right? What we want to do is that we just want to plot it over a map, right? So for example, we have this pick subplots, region, so the region's data. So as you can see here, it needs to be a list, right? So it needs to be a list. The data should be in a list format. So when you retrieve data, so for example, I'm just going to comment this out or just remove it. If we're just going to run this, right? So as you can see here, that D type is still an object, or you might say some dictionary. So what what matplotlib requires is at list. So there is a special function in pandas for a data frame is this to list function. So what it does is that it implements, it converts this object. So as you can see, just note this is the object, right? What we want to do, I want to display the regions label, right? So it's now a list here, as you can see here, right? So what we're trying to do is just convert everything into a list. Then I'm going to plot all of the agriculture data. Then if I'm going to plot it, as you can see, is that, yeah, I did some labels. I just used the same code here and I just modified it a little bit, right? As you can see here, the main contributor for agriculture would be this Central Luzon area. They're the main contributors for providing agriculture in terms of GRDP for the Philippines, right? So there's a comment line here. So what if we add this comment just to make it, as you can see, it's blurred, they're overlapping. That's why we implement this one, this auto format to date. So what it does, it just angles it a little bit. So this code here, you may need to research about these are the certain quirks in the Matplotlib library. You may need to look for the properties on how to make it, to style it better. That's what I'm saying. So next one is, let's create a bar graph using the service column. So I'm just going to copy the code that we have on top. So the name of our service is that services. So this is services. So it's not only services. So let's use this. Let's rename this. Let's paste it. So I'm just copy pasting here. So for services, so again, best practice is for you to rename the functions here. Services. Services. So I'm just renaming, right? So as you can see, if I'm going to plot. So as you can see here, it's quite opposite. The concentration of the services column is for Metro Manila. So other regions are quite low. So you may be wondering, okay, I guess another exercise is that for the industries now. So we can actually do another diagram, another plot. Let's plot the industry, right? So again, what I can do is insert codes. As you can see here, I can just click this one. Then what I'll do is copy again. So let's rename this as industry. Industry. So just industry. So as you can see, I'm just modifying industry. Then industry. Regions is still the same, right? A small I. Okay, so let's see. So as you can see, Calabarzon is now on top, right? Provides you the best stack. So if you're going to notice, these types of analysis, this type of visualization is quite very rudimentary. It's very simple, right? For majority, but it's already powerful. It's instead of me looking at this, right? Instead of us looking at the table where it provides us this visualization, or this graph provides us a better view on how the data looks like. You can implement more transformation to do those things. So we have the services and industry. So you may be wondering, okay, what is the relation of those services in this plots, right? So again, if I'm going to run this code here. So as you can see, the contributor is for, let's say, Metro Manila, provides you the industry and services, and agriculture is quite very small. So if we're going to look at this, there's a lot of boilerplate. I think that's the main message as well when you're creating when you're creating graphs in general. There's a lot of boilerplate code, and there are also other libraries in Python like Bokeh if you want to add interactivity to the system, right? You have interactivity. Yeah, if you have interactivity that you want to do, then you have that bar graph and so on. You want to have those. So if we're going to implement this stack bar graph here, as you can see, is that Metro Manila provided you the GRDP for all bulk of your GRDP in terms of the Philippines, but it's mostly related to the services industry, which is true because in terms of, let's say, industrial service contribution, let's say call centers, IT BPO, those types of industries, they tend to be centrally located in Metro Manila. Then you're going to look at the various industries. So for example, Calabarzon and Central Luzon. This is true because a lot of your manufacturing, or let's say, yeah, manufacturing, I don't know, textiles, but manufacturing in general are situated in the Calabarzon area, Cavite, Laguna side. Then you have other regions on the other side, on the lower half. But what is something that you can also see, look at, is that the unequal distribution of, let's say, of contribution in terms of wealth and let's say economic factor viability. That's why they say if you shut down Metro Manila, will the whole Philippines will be able to run in terms of economics, right? I think this is one of the question in the COVID response before we're in. Even though Metro Manila has a high surge, you cannot shut down Metro Manila because it contributes this much in terms of the contribution in terms of the economy. So you'd rather, if let's say, if there's a high surge in the Bangsamoro area, which is the reality that we currently have based on this data, is that maybe the government would opt to, let's shut down Bangsamoro because they contribute less, because that is the reasoning behind some of the policies of government, some of the actions, which is may or may not be true, because again, there's still all of these is more of just economic contributions, right? So but this is actually a challenge for the rest of, let's say, the country to have a more distributed, a more diversified distribution of GRDP, or our gross domestic or products or contribution to economy. Is that the more diversified the economy is, the better it is. You lose that dependence. And it also tells you that there's, again, overpopulation. If we have, let's say, population data, we can plot it over across here, and you're going to notice that Metro Manila would be also high. And it will tell you that because of that setup, people are going into Metro Manila just to get this type of contribution from the economy. So those are the type of analysis that you may not build just the simple graphs or simple tables, right? So again, that analysis is just I just draw it up, right? So again, don't use that analysis for to do anything more than for this workshop. So it only stays in this confines of the workshop here. So again, you have the subplots here. Again, let's say this one, it's just a very simple bar graph. It just tells you which industry or which sector contributes mostly into the GRDP component. So using the graphs above, we can say that the contribution of the services provides the greatest impact in terms of GRDP. Something worth highlighting, even though we market. So again, we always say Philippines is an agricultural country. The contribution of this sector provides the least. There is a need to improve the contribution of this sector in terms of, let's say, salary, in terms of people building those economy or improving that sector, right? Because agriculture is your foundation for these other two columns. Because if you have a very weak agriculture, these two sectors here may collapse under its own weight, right? So something worth mentioning there. And going back to this diagram here is that, or this graph here, is that the contribution is concentrated to the Central Luzon area, which is Metro Manila, Calabarzon, and Central Luzon areas. So these are actually, that's why they have the mentioning of the Imperial Manila and so on, because it's center of the, in terms of GRDP, center of economy is there, right? So yeah, then again, you have questions for this diagram or for this visualization. So basically what we just did is just read the data from what we have scraped, transform it, play around with it, look at it on a different view and visualize it. That's it. Those are data wrangling. You may want to add more context to it. You may want to add more workflows, more logic to it, but it's already up to you guys on how you want to structure your logic. So yeah. So again, for this workshop, this is just a summary for this section, right? So for the entire of a synthesis of this workshop. So we have learned how to implement a short data scraping workflow using Python. And from those data that we have scraped, we have learned how to clean and organize the data that we have scraped and visualize them into graphs. So it's more of we're just slicing and dicing the data and so on. So again, for the specific syntaxes, for example, I want to only get the certain regions for this. So for example, um, let's say I just want to get the data for all of the Luzon data only. You can do that. You can look for the syntax on how to parse or retrieve the data for all of Luzon or for all of Visayas or for all of Mindanao. Then you can have that separate view as well. So yeah, then visualize them into graphs. So basically that's the entire pipeline for data science. Actually, data science or data wrangling is that you need to get data. Once you get data, you process the data, you visualize the data, you interpret the data, and you draw a conclusion. Essentially, that's the entire workflow for a data science workflow. The challenge now is that using the domain that you have, using other concepts that will help you analyze the data will be the more critical part versus learning the tool. So this is basically the tool that you have. And just imagine if I'm just going to run this every year. I'm just going to run this every year. I don't have a spreadsheet. I'm just going to run this. And that's it. Basically, it helps me already to understand the economic data that we have. So again, so for the next steps of this workshop, if again, if you're going to extend or you want to learn new work on your own, all right, this workshop is not the exhaustive workflow. Again, there's going to be more how do you say, logic controls, more libraries that you can learn, concepts that you may want to include in terms of your data wrangling skill sets. But what we aim for this workshop is that to have that generalized workflow. Once you have defined the generalized workflow, it's now easy to get the data out and process them. And the participant is expected to keep on practicing. So as I mentioned, for the web scraping, maybe you want to scrape other websites, not just Wikipedia. Maybe you want to scrape, let's say news website, let's say GMA, or you may want to scrape ABS-CBN or even Twitter or other websites that will enrich your workflow. Then you constantly do that pipeline. You constantly do this workflow, and I guarantee you you'll be able to master at the syntax or APIs. Because even for me, I don't remember or I don't recall all of the APIs, but as long as I keep on doing a certain workflow or certain step, then it becomes more naturally or inherent for me. So yeah, we
All right.
have questions. Yeah.
I think we can move on to the questions. Guys, if you have any questions, please let us know on the chat. Take
chat.
take advantage of this opportunity to raise any clarifications about what has been discussed about the data wrangling part. So you can just drop them over at the chat. Also in the live stream, if you have any questions, we're monitoring the comments as well. So as Ian mentioned, this is it's quite simple if you enumerate it, right? Once you get the data, you will work on it, normalize just like this, which is basically the data wrangling part. You will visualize it just as Ian showed here with the graphs that we have. And after you did such things, you will proceed to the interpretation. So those steps are, if we think about it, it's kind of simple, but for us to have a conclusion about the problems that we're trying to solve, we need more of this, more complex version of this if needed, or a lot of other data sets to consider to make a decision So this is a simple example of how you can do that, from getting the data to uh, influencing decisions, I guess, based on the conclusions that you can gather from your analysis of the data that you have.
Yeah, and also, right, you have all of these, for example, this graphs here, this is GRDP. The question now is, okay, which areas now, because this is in a regional scale, right? You may now ask, okay, which provinces contribute most? Yeah, I mean, you can break this down even further, and you need to look for those data sets now outside of the what we have scraped, right? So, and you may also play around with other data sets that can influence this. As I mentioned earlier, population data. So, if you
That's
add population to this, right, or
maybe
age groups, right, you have
location, accessibility.
location even, road networks, you can have those, placements of land use, even we can play munch a lot of data here. It's just yeah, but again, I go back to that, go back to the premise is that you need to build that domain as well, because munching data is very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing actually. Yeah, even if you know the API, if the concepts or core principles or the analysis that you produce are against the core principles of, let's say, economics or physics or sciences, then you're going to introduce a lot of misinformation or even biases, which is more dangerous in the overall scheme of things.
All right. So, guys, any questions? So I also posted our attendance and feedback form. So there you can influence what will be the topic of our next sessions or maybe workshops. And do let us know if this session has been helpful for you in your journey or in your professions. And you can also connect with Ian and also myself. Well, I did not introduce myself. I'm Charmaine Mamador. I'm the project lead of Ausomemaps. And our speaker today is Ian Panganiban. You can catch us both on LinkedIn or here on Facebook. So, questions, guys? Going once? Okay, LinkedIn link down, Sir Ian.
All right, wait lang LinkedIn. I'll post LinkedIn.
I'm logged in. Actually, guys, this would be a good opportunity to connect. And also, Maps has a GitHub organization. So aside from doing the mapping that we do for Maps, we're also building a platform. So all of the data sets that we are able to gather during our mapathons and of course some web scraping or data gathering that we did for the project, we ultimately want to serve it in a platform that focuses its user interface for the families or the siblings and therapists or educators that will benefit in accessing the data set that we have. So if you want to be a part of that GitHub organization, then you can just, how can they join? They will just join, right? They will just join and we will accept.
Okay. I think there are two folds here. I think one is the yung organization itself. Di lang yung GitHub cam, yung it's more of the org, Ausomemaps org. How do I join to Ausomemaps org?
Oh, okay.
So yeah,
They will
that thing. Yeah.
come on.
So that's one. Yung GitHub, I can post the GitHub page for us, but I think the main venue would be on the, how should I say, I mean, Ausomemaps.org itself, right? So siguro ano ba, Facebook ano page.
Yeah, maybe you can show them since you're already sharing the screen.
Wait. Okay, wait lang Ausomemaps. Okay. wait lang. Resume share. So, okay. Okay, so this is the Ausomemaps organization. So we're still building the repository. So currently this is still work in progress. And there's also the Facebook page of Ausomemaps. So I guess since everyone has already liked it, I think kasi naka-notify kayo, right?
That's
So
right.
yun, right, na-notify so you know about
Or
Ausomemaps.
directly.
Uh,
So we have some
so
about internship and career opportunities right now. So we're still building this organization, and we're starting with the platform. So we plan to s- to to scale this if possible. So we'll keep working on the platform, and probably in the future there will be this internship and career.
yeah,
If you
and
want to volunteer, yes, maybe you can send us a message on the Awesome Apps page. We appreciate every help that we can get.
yeah,
Another comment on the live stream naman. So he's asking if this is a GIS application. Yes, this platform will be map centric.
yeah,
So meaning there will be a map, and our interface capitalizes on how maps display information, which I found is very useful kasi spatial yung way of spatial, SPATIAL, like spaces. The spatial way of displaying information gives a lot of information at once, right? Yeah, Rainier is right. That's spatial. A lot of information at once. You can see the points where it's located. You can see other features on the map. For example, is it near a big road? Is it near the hospital? Is it accessible by transport? So we're trying to create this interface, and it will be map centric. I guess it will be a web-based GIS.
yeah.
It's an old way of school of saying it.
Yeah. So yeah, ano siya, yes, it's very centric as you mentioned. So I think one advantage then is that it can be accessed by anyone. I think that's the main objective then, is that everyone would have access to it and be able to see, okay, where are the education, and if this project succeeds, or hopefully when this project succeeds, it spouts more, or pushes other advocacies na would grow this platform. And yeah, and hindi lang din siya siguro right now, kasi ang background namin ni Cham is mostly related sa mapping and so on, and
That's
we're
right.
also looking for, let's say, other disciplines that will help. I think that's the main objective then, is that also maps is not only focused on, let's say, the map per se, but also the engagement of other disciplines, or this is an interdisciplinary talaga siya, exercise, right, or project. So but the focus, yeah, and the focus of kami dala ni Chamos would most likely be on the maps, because that's where we parang niche or specialty. Yeah.
Right. So Ian, on the Facebook Live, somebody asked for recommendations to Miss Vanessa. Do you have any recommendations where can we access public government data that can be used for analysis?
Public government data. Okay. Public government data. The usually PhilSA, kasi depende sa organization na gusto mong focus. So if the focus is mostly economics, PhilSA, Philippine Statistics Authority would be the main hub for it. Tapos if you're looking for geospatial, again, GeoPortal is available, because the issue with government is the data is not necessarily is there, but hindi siya yung parang machine readable format. Let's say PDF, you open the PDF, you need to encode those PDFs, right? I mean, those values. So hindi siya katulad ng CSV na nakuha kaagad natin, so on. And web scraping will not necessarily help you on that. It will help you to get the PDF, but it will not do so much after that. So, but for recommendations, GeoPortal, so maybe I can show it here. Yeah, yung pinakita ko kanina, GeoPortal. GeoPortal Philippines, right? So it tells you yung spatial information of various data sets. So you have this, and isa dyan. Tapos kung nasa hazards naman tayo, hazards focus, there's also the UP NOAA data set. There also have those kung papasok kayo sa national mga hazards, as you can see, meron dyang floods and so on, flood data, NOAA license, and so on. So yeah, double check nyo lang. Again, we also check for license for this. So for hazard maps and so on. I also encourage usage of OpenStreetMap itself, right?
You can get
I
data
think,
from
yeah, you
itself.
can use OpenStreetMap. So, and there's, and also I think Pistan ng Mapa is also open for volunteers, right? I think you can
Yes.
also, we'll also post it there. So you can connect to various government agency, and not just various people who are also creating this data set. So OpenStreetMap then pwede din kayo mag-download. Actually, ang kagandahan sa OSM is that it downloads the data kung ano yung na-contribute ng community regarding this road networks and so on. It's also available there to be downloaded. Government data, yeah. Philippine Statistics at saka GeoPortal, yun yung main. Tapos, if you're looking into, pinaka-safe na kasi talaga si Philippine Statistics Authority to have those. Pag-asa also has, pero yeah, have those
I think
datasets.
you can also try to request specific data set from the Freedom of Information.
The FOI platform.
Yeah. You
Yeah,
request, you
PH.
can request here because for
Mm.
Ausomemaps, actually Erwin requested for us. So he requested for the requested data from DepEd about the SPED schools sa Pilipinas. So it's a report actually that we got that outlines kung ilan, what kind of disorder or disability. Hindi lang autism yung nandun sa dataset na yun. But we are able to get it by requesting here. I would recommend just to be proactive in your request because they can ask for they can ask some questions about why are you requesting for this data and so on. So yun. I would also add Asian Development Bank. Key indicators. I can't remember, but it's from ADB naman. Asian Development Bank key indicators. Some platform. Can you try search?
Just diba? Right. PDB.
Ito KID, yeah. So yan, marami ding data sets dito na I think would fall on public government data. But this would be the original data set, not just specific to the Philippines. So here you don't need to make a request. So it's you can just download, probably get an Excel or a PDF.
CSV.
Another
So-
recommendation would be the Humanitarian Data Exchange. I think it's a platform by the United Nations. So, meron din mga datasets doon. Actually, madaming datasets out there. So, you just need to do your due diligence and check kung ano yung source niya originally. When it was sourced, because time is relevant when it comes to public datasets also. Probably it will be from 10 years ago, so might not really be relevant to whatever
Relevant.
purpose you're doing. Another platform that I like is Our World in Data. So in this platform, I like it because of all the visualizations that you can do. It's really interactive. Apart from that, you can also download, if I remember correctly, the data set itself. So you can check out this coronavirus. Actually, they grew a lot during the pandemic. And this is a really good example of the visualizations that you can do. So today we just showed very simple ones,
Yeah.
but we know that there's a whole whole world of
Suite.
libraries out there
Yeah.
that's been
Yeah.
used for visualization. So it's just up
So,
to you to try and test.
yeah.
And of course practice, because
Yeah.
it requires a lot of practice just to be proficient
Yeah.
in any of these libraries that you're going to choose.
So, right. So, yeah.
I think nasagot na namin yung pre-spatial databases. So
Yeah.
one would be Geoportal, as Ian
Geoportal.
mentioned earlier. I think we also have the Philippine Atlas, right, Ian?
Oh, pero if you want to have official,
Yeah.
again, because again, there is a discussion about, okay, is it official or is it just data, right? So
If you're just wanting to play around
mm, mm,
or just practice your data wrangling
yeah,
skills.
yeah, skill, yeah. Sometimes okay na yung ano. Actually, Kaggle even if you really want to do this data wrangling stuff, go for the Kaggle exercises. They have data, they have models. If you want to go to machine learning, even hindi siya for Philippines focus, but they have data sets, various data
We
sets,
have
and
more documents.
yeah, yeah. So for example, Marvel Comics, 1,500 characters, and their right. So we can play around their appearance, right? So we can play around with those data. Nababato, Avengers, Absorbing Man, Abyss, yeah. Yeah, you have all of these, right? So yeah, Kaggle is a good way if you want to be proficient in data wrangling. Usually yung mahirap kasi sa data wrangling is that the problem definition. So for example, I just want to test the API. So nag-isip pa ako ng problem na kailangan ko i-solve or ano yung output na kailangan ko i-generate, diba? So it's quite hard to be proficient in that. So if you want to be proficient in API development, yung paggawa ng workflows and stuff, go for Kaggle because it will train you talaga on how to build your proficiency in Python, in the scraping, in the libraries of Python and Bokeh and so on, Matplotlib, Pandas and so on. So have that. Yeah. Kaggle. Just need to create an account.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Rainier. So I guess we can end na. If there are no more questions, I don't see
questions.
any new questions then sa live stream. So before we end, I can share my screen. Where's my screen? Hold on. Okay. All right. So I think we can conclude today's session. So maraming salamat everyone for attending our first workshop actually for Ausomemaps. But as we mentioned in the feedback form, we put in there a question to see if you have any topics in mind that we can consider for our next workshop. And if you have anything, comments or suggestions on how we can improve this workshop better, we will appreciate if you add them on the feedback form as well. So can I request everyone just to turn on their videos if it's possible? I would just like to take a group photo. If that's okay.
ayaw nila. So yeah, they don't want kasi live stream
Okay,
sila. Eh.
I see. I see people na.
Okay na yan.
Just for a quick snap.
Ah,
Okay, I'll just take a screenshot for attendance.
ah,
Okay. So maraming salamat everyone for allotting time, a bit of your time today for our workshop. We hope that you learned something from our web scraping and data wrangling with Python workshop today, made possible by Ausomemaps through the Open Mapping Hub Asia Pacific and the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. So we would like to again thank you for your attendance, and we hope to see you on the next one. And if you have your LinkedIn, please connect with us and do let us know if you have any more questions regarding the topics that we have discussed today. Maraming salamat everyone, and I'm going to end our stream today. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank
thank
you.
you. Goodbye.